So when we can take our core values and translate them into this is how I'm showing up for my podcast, people feel it.
Mm.
There's an authenticity to someone who's willing to grow and willing to learn about themselves that people can spot from miles away.
Welcome to Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs. I'm Kristin Fields Chadwick, your podcast coach on this transformative podcasting journey. Our mission: empower Kingdom entrepreneurs to confidently launch and grow podcasts, fostering a journey of being seen, being heard, being known, and making a lasting kingdom impact. This is Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs. Your voice matters. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show, Andrea. I'm so excited that you're here.
Me too, Kristin. I think this is going to be a really good conversation.
I do too. I am so fascinated by all the different personality types, and DISC is one, and all that is around DISC is one that I haven't fully dove into,
Ooh.
and I'm excited to touch on that. But first, before we talk about DISC, is I know we talked about how our core values are really such a foundational piece in who we are as a person and what we choose to do with those core values and how it presents in our communication. And so I couldn't think of a better way to help podcasters specifically
Yeah.
really hone in and get that sweet spot.
Yeah, my podcast, I've been doing this for about 3 years, and my podcast started out with my business name, which is The Intentional Optimist, but it started out with Intentional Optimists, Unconventional Leaders. And, any of your listeners who are developing their own podcast, and I know I've listened recently to one of your episodes talking about finding your voice. And I think as you grow, you develop it better. But, as business owners, hopefully we're always developing and growing. And as Christians, I hope we're always developing and growing. I hope that is a lifelong pursuit for anyone listening here. If not, talk to me, right?
Right.
Because that's my passion. But my podcast started off with that, and I interviewed a bunch of ladies. So I have like all these interviews with women that didn't sound like leaders from the beginning, but turns out leadership is everywhere. And we lead ourselves first. I'm a Maxwell certified speaker trainer coach, and you mentioned DISC consultant. And so as I started diving into all of that, I realized that my own business of me and figuring me out and my brand was really needed to kind of come to the forefront, because I can do somebody else's stuff all day long, but I'm never satisfied. I'm never fulfilled. I feel disempowered. But when I do what I'm supposed to be doing, we can even call that called to do, then I have a lot of passion and conviction. And some of that is understanding who I am. So my new podcast name is Stand Tall and Own It. And so it's just a matter of figuring out how best can I represent what I'm supposed to do and where I'm supposed to be. Because anybody who has a podcast has decided they have something to say.
Absolutely.
And if you've decided you have something to say, there's a reason you have that decision in your bones, right? I mean, it's like you can't decide you have something to say and have no core values underneath it.
Right.
And I like to tell people that my business is basically three main parts. It's this nice little sort of a Venn diagram, if you want, but it's almost one of those circular pieces. And it starts with knowing yourself, which is your core values. And we'll chat about that in just a second. And then the second is communicating who you are. So understanding how you're wired to communicate, because you want to be able to communicate well what you're passionate about. So you want to be able to communicate those core values to others. Core values also helps you set your boundaries. We'll talk about that.
Boundaries. Let's talk about boundaries.
As women, we really, 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 really need to hear that. But then the third piece is then living it out in a way that honors the core values, honors who you are and how you're wired to speak and to talk and to like a podcast or the message that you have to bring with grace and ease. And I call that intentional optimism. And I have 6 tenets there. So I love starting, and that's why I always talk on podcasts. I love starting with core values, because understanding, we can say I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. But if we don't understand how we are fearfully and wonderfully made, or how I am different, I am fearfully and wonderfully made differently than you have been, And I don't mean that in an existential way. I think we all have the fingerprint of God on us. That's what the Imago Dei is. I met my husband in seminary, so let me know if I I
No,
enjoy the theology stuff.
this is
So
my
we're
jam.
okay.
So, yeah.
So we all have that fingerprint, but every fingerprint's a little different. And I don't think that God imprints upon us something that is going to be a cookie cutter. Obviously not.
Mm.
So understanding your core values is important. And so for me, that's where I start. That's what I love to talk to people about. And I usually start with a definition because there's a lot of talk out there about values in general and core values particularly. And I consider core values something that you are born with. I do not see them as outside of you. I like the definition I use is basically the principles and guiding. Actually, where's the exact one that I would use? It's the principles and priorities that guide you, your actions, everything that you do, and they represent the foundational convictions that allow you to navigate any kind of complex situation while keeping your identity and authority at the forefront.
Mm.
Okay.
Wow.
So, yes, I did go read that. I had to, because I can say it, but I want to make sure I get all of those pieces in there. A lot of people talk about things that they value. Corporations want to have core values. That's all great. And I do work with organizations in figuring out what theirs are,
Mm.
but they're different than your individual core values. It's like a compass. It's like how you were wired and put together. And, we talk about knitted together, and you're created unique. You have a specific personality type. And I love that you I say I geek out on them.
Too.
And
Too.
on my podcast, I've actually done a series of I'm in the middle of it right now, a series of 10 episodes of 5 different tools that I use all the time and that have really given me stability. And one of them is DISC. But underlying all of that, and the reason why I go that direction is because of my core values. So anything that is outside of me is not a core value. My family is not a core value. And people, especially in Christian circles, push back on that so hard. I'm like, I can appreciate that you value your family. I value my family. I mean, I worked hard to get my son, who is 15, and went through infertility and adoption. So I get it, right? So, and I lost my mom to cancer when I was 50. And so and in case you hadn't noticed, I'm above 50. My son was adopted at 42, and this is after infertility and, all kinds of stuff. So I do value family, but really what I value in family, my core values show up in the way I value family. So helping people step back from the traditional definition of values is a lot of the work. It's a lot of work that I do in coaching. It's a lot of the work that I do in my podcast. And in conversations like this, I almost feel like I have to set the record straight. And honestly, here's the deal. Because one of my core values is authenticity, you can have any value that you want. I don't need for you to see the definition of core values the way I do, but I believe it will set you free. I believe it will give you the authority that you need. Understanding how you're wired will give you the authority to stand in your own message, to be able to say, oh, this is where I begin and you end. This is where your boundaries come from. It will give you the ability to speak and communicate and work with conviction and passion and the things that you feel strongly about. I think before we started recording, I said, yeah, I'm starting to pitch people about core values and say, yeah, if you don't have this piece in place, you can just do all the other stuff, but you can forget it because this is the most important thing. Because I'm living out my core values in the way that I speak and the way that I run my business and the way that I podcast. So it gives me it will give you the authority and the passion and conviction. But then it also, because of those two pieces, what comes next? Can you hear it? Do you know what comes next? What do you think comes next?
Oh, after values?
No,
Then
after having the authority and the passion, what do you think that would give you?
Influence, because you're aligned with what you're
Yes.
called to do.
So it gives you influence, but it gives you confidence.
And confidence. Yes, absolutely. For
And
sure.
so when you have confidence, it's just amazing. You don't defend yourself.
Yeah.
There's no reason to like fix everybody else out there. There's no reason to defend yourself on other things. It gives you the ability. Look, I'm still working on this. I'm a work in progress. I'm still quote unquote niching down, but I'm getting to the place where it no longer bothers me when I pitch to a podcast to talk about my core values. And when I say I'm passionate about helping women change the cultural narrative by thinking critically, creating imaginatively, and leading effectively. So when this dude says, yeah, my podcast is about men, I don't think you're a good fit. I'm like, I know, but really, I think I am. And now it doesn't offend me. I'm like, you know what? Why am I even pitching these podcasts? That's silly.
Uh-huh.
But being able to understand you means that, and if we have kids, have you ever used the hula hoop analogy for personal space?
Oh, no.
Oh,
Please
okay.
share.
My son, when we adopted him, we did not know because we didn't think we had ADHD in our family, and we probably don't. It may be that we do, but I don't think we do. But he is kind of off the charts,
Okay.
confined type ADHD. So we as older parents had to learn everything. And one of the things we had to learn was the idea of personal space and how we define that. And we learned a lot about positive opposites. We don't tell kids what we don't want them to do, right? We tell kids
Right.
what we do want them to do, which in essence would like keep them from doing the things we don't want to do. Like, please, walking feet, right? Don't run,
Mhm.
walking feet. But we learned that personal space was a thing that he didn't quite get as a youngster. And so we said, here's a hula hoop. Everything inside that is your space. Everything outside of that is not your space. So if you carry a hula hoop around and you're bumping into other people, you need to stay out of their space.
So
That's a
good.
real, and just so that gave me a really good visual of understanding it's okay to be inside my space as
Mhm.
me. And you don't need to be in here with me. When I can invite you out of that space in a way that says, this is just mine. Right.
Mhm.
So those are the ways that understanding core values have shown up for me in my business and in my speaking and the way I coach people. Because anybody that coaches with me, first thing we do is their disc, because I just want a place to start with. And that's a little bit more tangible. Like, you've already taken a disc assessment, it's tangible.
Mhm.
So I can put that out there. And then the next thing we do is we start walking through core values. And it takes some a day, it takes some 6 months, and some are still revising. And that's all good because we're all a little bit different. But
Yeah.
when they know that and they layer them together, it's just this beautiful, oh, moment.
Yes.
you know?
Yeah. I can imagine that there's such a sigh of relief because, like, if we're not aligned in our core values, then it might feel like you're trudging through mud of like just trying to achieve something,
Mhm.
but that may not be your core value. Your core value may be contentment in where you're
Mm.
at
Mhm.
and holding space for that core value instead of always trying to push forward against your own core. Yeah.
Yeah. You're picking up what I'm laying down for
Uh-huh.
sure. So for instance, I'll tell you what mine are. My top one, actually, do you put the video of this out?
I yes, uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're not watching the video, I'm holding up a piece of paper that is really old. It is from like 1993.
Nice. I
And
was 12.
okay. Well, have you ever heard of the Franklin Covey system?
Yes, but
Okay.
okay, remind me what it is. I have
So
heard of this,
it
though.
was these planners. You can see these 6-ring
Yes.
binder,
My
6-ring
yes.
binder. It was these planners, and Stephen Covey bought it. It started out as the Franklin Planner, and then Stephen Covey bought it. And so I read his book. This is when I was in seminary where I met my husband. And one of the things that I did was this is when I was, it's like 30 years ago, right?
Uh-huh.
20, 27, 26, 28, whatever I was, I don't know. And one of the things it had us do was write our governing values.
Okay.
And so I put out 10, or I put out 9, and I don't do numbers. That's one of the things I don't do. And one of the very top one, they had them labeled like 1 to 9 or whatever. The top one was that, and it's freedom.
Mm.
And at the time, I thought it was like, it says, I'm not controlled by anyone or any else, money or time. I have no job. Yeah. Well, that's a 27-year-old, right? But here's the interesting thing. What I've learned is that many of these some of them are outside of me, and there can be governing values. They can be things I value, because I do value peace and tranquility. I do value family. I do value my physical health. I've been through some stuff, and I lost my mother to cancer, I mean, so there's some things, but what I see inside all of these is my actual core, the beginnings of understanding my core values. And so when I say my top core value is freedom, I mean, and we always define our own core value, because freedom to me means something different than freedom might mean to you. And as I've grown, I've learned that freedom to me means like freedom of thought and autonomy. I am not one of those people that gets on board with other people. My mother called me the strong-willed child. Like, you are the quintessential strong-willed child. It's like, I just didn't know what to do with you. And I'm like, well, it's because you were telling me what to do and what to think. Like, that doesn't work for me. But it's not that I mind rules. I don't mind. I'm an Enneagram 6. So I'm like, I'm all about authority,
Oh, yeah.
I don't like rules that tell me that I have to conform to everyone else. So if there's a reason to stay within the rules, like if everybody's driving 70 miles an hour, I'm just going to say it right here on a podcast, I'm going to drive 70 miles an hour in a 55. If everybody else is driving 70, it is unsafe, right? It's like when there's a critical thinking ability or logical fallacy that comes with a rule, I'm like, peace out. And my husband, let me tell you how this has like shown up for me in my marriage, and even in my son just recently. My husband is on a disc. He's a C, which is, we'll talk about that some later, but he loves consensus. And so he would say things like, wouldn't you agree that, and then he would just put something out there. And I'm like, no. I don't know how to answer that, because if I don't agree with you, then I'm disagreeing with my husband, which I don't like conflict. And if I do agree with you, then I'm kind of admitting that I don't know. There's no win situation there, right? It's like, and so finally about 3 years ago, when I figured this all out, I said, would you mind rephrasing the way that you ask those questions? And he goes, what, And so we figured out, what do you think about this? Which gives me the autonomy and the freedom of thought. It means I don't have to agree with him. It means, and he never wanted me to agree with him. He married a sassy lady, right? I mean, it's like we met in seminary and we sit on Saturday mornings and have thorny theological conversations across the living room.
I love it.
And he's a pastor, by the way. And so that's normal for us. And so there's no reason why he wouldn't want me to think for myself. It's just, I had to learn how to communicate specifically to him, I need this instead of that. And my core value is such that when you say it that way to me, you might think you're asking in a way that is normal, but for me, it hits wrong. And so being able to turn around and say to him, here's the detail that I need from you, because he's the creative. He's the one that he then can respond. So now he knows. And every once in a while, he'll fall back into that. And then he'll be like, oh, hang on. But even last week, my son, who's 15, he's like all into the memes and all into, sharing stuff. And I'm like, and his music, teenagers' music, it's just like, whatever. It's like all over the place. And I was the kid who, I date myself, right? I'm 57. So Michael Jackson was huge when I was in high school. And I didn't like Michael Jackson because everybody liked Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
I was the one, I shall think for myself. Crystal Gale, it's just like, it's like, I don't listen to any country music now, but it was, so even when you don't know or don't realize your core values are showing up, they do. And I love to say to people, and it kind of shocks them, every single decision, every single reaction, every interaction, every collaboration, every anger, every big joyful moment has been somehow affected by, honored or dishonored, influenced by, or created by one of your core values. Because if you look back, when people figure them out and they start looking back over their life, like, oh, you're right. It's like this, I just got cold chills telling that, as an example. But for me, freedom of thought is my first. My second is authenticity. So I got to be me, right? It's like, I can't be someone else. This showed up a lot in high school. I grew up in Korea. My parents were missionaries. And my mother was very much a Southern lady
Mm.
and wanted me to dress a certain way and wear certain things. And we got silk dresses because we were in Korea. And finally, it's just like, this is not me, right? I mean, I got
Mhm.
big palm leaf things on and stripes. I mean, I like nautical stuff, but I did not handle it well. But I took all my stuff out of my closet and I marched in a room and I threw it on the bed. I said, "This is not me, it's you, and I'm tired of wearing your clothes."
Oh my
And
God.
if
Oh
you're a
man.
teenager, don't do that to your mom. It did not. It got the conversation started, but
Mhm.
it was those kinds of things I can look back and say, I needed that authenticity. I have to be me. And like I said, I'm a deconstructionist. I am a critical thinker, right? So you give me something, I'm gonna pull it apart. I mean, that's just the way it is. And that bothers people, but I have to be me. But the third piece, and this is the one that I really has become more clear to me recently, is the fact that it's belonging is
Mhm.
my third piece. And I thought for the longest time it was community. I had a wonderful missionary community that I grew up with. I was trying to recreate that. I even had a Facebook group of over 500 women, and it was just like, this is not what I wanted. And this is not meeting my need. And what it turned out was I needed my sister to say, hey, it doesn't matter what you think or believe or whether or not we agree on this political or theological thing. You're my sister and I love you. I'm like,
Mm.
now that put the salve on the wound. And I'm
Mm.
like, oh, that's belonging. That's different.
Mm.
So once we know what they are, then we can start to foster them, start to honor them. We can start to communicate them. But anyway, I feel like I'm just going on and on and on. I created
It's so
questions.
good. I love it. Yeah, I mean, I
We're
love
just
the
going to do a
story.
webinar here.
Well, I love the tangible real life connections of
Mhm.
how it plays out in your own life. And I think it would be helpful for the podcasters that are listening. Most of them are coaches and
Yeah.
leaders in ministry, leaders in their businesses. And I think they're probably asking, as I'm asking too, I love learning. And so when they're sitting and listening to this episode, how does that play out for them as a podcaster who shows up behind the mic and shares their part of their story? Or like you said, maybe they have a Facebook group and they're feeling that disconnect of I don't know how to create community. I would love for you to really dive in there for specifically podcasters
Okay.
and yeah, help them along that journey too.
So really quick, one of the best ways to know where to start with your core values is what really angers you or what really brings you joy.
Mm.
Because like I said, something is going to be touched. And when you start looking at why you're podcasting, when you start looking at what message you're trying to share, then it should become clear what are the things that you keep wanting to say over and over and over. Like write those down, right?
Mhm.
I was in a podcasting Facebook group and it's like she said, "Oh no, I just have 3 of the same episode." It's like it's the same topic on, I think it was in Buzzsprout or something. That's where I
Uh-huh.
heard mine. And she said, "I have 3 of the same topic. What am I going to do?" And I'm like, "Well, evidently this is important to you, right? Take a look." But as far as it showing up for me, being that whole sense of belonging, understanding that core values go both ways, right? I
Mhm.
want freedom of thought for me and I want freedom of thought for you. I
Mhm.
want authenticity for me and I want authenticity for you. I want belonging for me and I want you to feel like you belong as well. So when you know what your core values are, you can actually create that kind of atmosphere in your podcast.
Mhm.
I don't have, 100,000 downloads. I don't have even, I don't have 100 episode downloads, per episode. I don't have 100 downloads per episode. I'm going to say that right eventually. I do not have 100 downloads per episode. But what I do have is people who come to me and say, "You're so welcoming.
Mhm.
I can listen to you and it's calming for me." I'm like, "Oh,
Mhm.
good."
Yes.
Because I want to show up as me and I want to make sure that I create this space that is welcoming, that people feel like they belong, that they learn something.
Mhm.
Because I also have a speaking coach who taught me that not only do I have my core values, but there's 3 things that whenever I leave someone's presence, I kind of want them to feel.
Mm.
And they go along with my core values quite well. First is welcoming, well, spunky, excuse me. Spunky,
Uh-huh.
which is the freedom of thought.
Yes.
Welcoming, which is the belonging, and wise, which is the authenticity. It's like being that. So I want you to
So
feel
cool.
those things. And so being able to take your core values and translate them into maybe these, like I do, these 3 words that you say whenever somebody's done listening to an episode, I want to make sure that they feel these things because, like it or not, very few people listen to podcasts to just only learn stuff, right? I
Right.
mean, we want to be moved to action. We want to
Yes.
be moved to inspiration. I'm listening to a, a, a theology podcast that's like years and years long. And so I'm actually learning scripture, but that's a little different. I'm still very moved because
Yeah.
of the topic that's in there. And he speaks very passionately about certain things. And so when we can take our core values and translate them into this is how I'm showing up for my podcast, people feel it.
Mm.
There's an authenticity to someone who's willing to grow and willing to learn about themselves that people can spot from miles away.
Yep. Absolutely. And it's almost like a like is attracted to like. So,
Mhm.
and I wonder too, and tell me what your thoughts on this are. What about like, say I'm a podcast listener and I'm looking for somebody who's totally opposite from me because I need a different area of focus than
Mhm.
maybe how I normally operate. Have you seen that? Or is it more, do you think that people mm, gravitate towards core values that they align with? What do you
Oh, I
think?
think there's plenty complementary ones. You know, if you've ever studied color theory, one of my I love telling the stories about being on an entrepreneurial journey for a really long time before I actually became a leadership coach. And it started way back with Amway and then Mary
Oh,
Kay and,
yeah.
all kinds of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And all the lessons learned through that. But one of the things I also looked at when I was trying to make an exit plan for my 25-year career in higher education was interior design because I love it and it's really
Mhm.
pretty and I love being able to create these spaces and I even used words like belonging and peace. And
That's so
yeah,
funny.
but when I didn't get an A on my first stuff, I was like, well, I'm out of here. But one of the things that I loved, and she marked me down for it, was I had paint and I had to mix color. And she said, you need to actually mix the yellow and the blue to make green. You can't just use the green out of the tube. And I'm like, this woman's in New York. How dare you? I
Uh,
did mix the yellow and the blue, thank you very much. Is it not possible that you could say, "This is so perfect. Did you use the green or did you really mix it this well?" But she
yeah,
just said it, she said it the wrong way, and I'm like, "I'm out."
it
Because what that did, couple things, I'll use it as an example, couple things, it really hit my authenticity. It's like, "No, you're questioning me," it just that doesn't work. But then looking at the color wheel, if you understand color theory, you've got complementary colors that are opposite. And then you've got colors that are beside themselves. My son is in art class, and so he had to
Mhm.
do this color wheel thing. And so it's similar with core values. For instance, if you have somebody who has like, let's see, one of my clients, some an unusual one, see if I can do it with an unusual one. I think her top one of my clients' top core value was reliability or like steadfastness. Like if basically it was, if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. So I need you to
Mhm.
do that. Right. So someone else's could be like consistency and it could show up really well in a team situation. Or it could be for me, they're like this freedom of thought. I
Mhm.
listen to a couple of podcasters that some of the people on here would be like, you listen to what? Because I want that challenge to my
Yes.
freedom of thought, right? I
Okay.
wanna be challenged to think differently. And, some of that includes language that I wouldn't say out loud. It
Mhm.
might include them espousing certain belief systems that I don't espouse, but
Mhm.
it makes me think. Therefore, it stimulates my own core value and it gives me the ability to say, hang on, how would I approach that? Right.
Mm.
So I think that's my own personal examples
Okay.
of how that would work. But
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is knowing your people, knowing your audience. And that's so hard for podcasters. It's like,
Mhm.
who is your ideal customer? Who's your ideal audience member?
Right.
And, I think it's easy to overlook that. But when you know who you are, you're more likely to find the people that you're supposed to be talking to.
Ooh. Yeah, and that's a good segue, I think, of when we know who we are with those core values, and I call it your kingdom identity. What is
Sure.
that? Those woven together parts and pieces of God's thumbprint on us. And when we really get to hone in on that, that's where we get to step into more understanding of who we are so that we can better serve those that God has put in our circle of influence. So I'd love for you to kind of move into more of the DISC assessment and how
Okay.
that could be a great tool to further grow as a person, as a podcaster, and why that's so beneficial as a podcaster.
Yeah, I think understanding how patterns show up in the way we speak and the things that we need. So DISC is a personality behavior analysis, quite frankly. It's not even a personality test. It's a behavior analysis tool that shows us how we communicate and how we receive information. And I'll just give you a really quick D, I, S, and C. It's the 4 quadrants of an X and Y axis. The D is the dominant. They're the driver. They really want to get things done. They're very bottom line. The
Mhm.
I is the influencer and the inspirational, and they are like me, and they are all about storytelling and making sure that people feel a certain way, right? It's like they're the fun in the party. Then your S's are your steadies. These are the ones that are the backbone of your organization. These are the ones that are your team players. These are the ones that make sure everyone feels included, right?
Mm,
And I
mhm.
noticed you're an S,
Yep.
right? So it's like it means that everybody feels included when they're like they're all in your tent, right?
Yes.
And then the C, the last one, is the creative or the compliant. These are your detail people. They're going to, when you ask them to do something, they're going to ask you 10 more questions, and it's going to feel like an interrogation, but it's because they want to get it right.
Mm,
So in these patterns, when we see certain things, then we can recognize in ourselves, I'm a storyteller. My dear friend and colleague, whom I've known since I was 17 years old and who has mentored me in all of this, is a DI. And so she's a very high D, and she is a colonel in the military and in the Air Force, and she's an ROTC instructor. She
makes
doesn't
sense.
need my, she doesn't need my stories. Right? She
Yeah.
also doesn't need my, like when she helps me, I'm like, I just want to say again, thank you so much. She's like, don't get all touchy feely on me. Right. So I just learned to say, thank you, right? It's like, so
Yeah.
I know how to communicate with her, but my second letter is C. So not only am I inspirational, but I also need those details. And she knows that when we work together, like we put a conference on in January, she's like, all right, here's the details for the C. And she'll just, and so being able to understand that I needed to say to my husband, who's also a C, who needed that instruction on my core values, knowing how to communicate to him and how he needed to hear it made all the difference in the world.
Mm,
It also means that I'll not push him to move any faster than he's going to go.
mm,
Right. So when I actually got this certification before I left the University of Virginia. I was in the School of Medicine, and I managed at any given point, I managed up to 5 to 25 people. And so being able to understand the patterns that I was seeing in people, I had one person who would just like put her head down and she was go, 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 go. But she would hit a point and she would explode. And the first couple times just threw me until I realized, wait a minute, the S's, 69% of our population, they are the status quo keepers. They are going to make the trains run on time. They're going to make sure everything happens. They're your consistency people.
mhm,
And she was hitting this point where she was like overloaded. And I'm like, okay, I need to learn how to help her manage that. We do
mm,
it with my kid, right? It's like I shared a little bit earlier that I actually talked to my son about this, about I love your music, or I love you, but I don't always love your music. And when you say, can I play my music in the car? And I'm driving on a long trip, I'm like, do I really want to do that? So that gives me, so I even told him, I said, so as long as you give me veto power on any one song, I'm fine.
mhm,
But when you take disc and you say, I see the patterns, like for instance, even if you're as a podcaster, you might say, okay, so I'm talking to accountants. It's likely that most of these people are C's because a lot of accountants are the detail people, right? It's like the
yeah,
IRS people.
mhm,
Then
yes,
you know they need the detail. They need all of that. But
yeah,
if you're talking to other podcasters, they might be more inspirational people, and you want to make sure you tell stories or help them see themselves in a story. If you're talking to D's, are only 3% of the population, so it's probably rare that anybody's going to talk to a audience full of D's. But if they're entrepreneurs, it's possible. And so when you just get to the bottom line, it's like the too long didn't read, like put those in your communication. when you know what the different types are, you can actually hit all 4 types in any one communication and make sure that everybody feels seen, because
Wow.
that's the beautiful part of it, while communicating inside your core values. And when you do that, I call it magnetic leadership, because it just
Wow.
like brings people to you. They get it.
Yeah. That for me is such a game changer and maybe like a key to unlock making your podcast episode specifically go from good to absolutely great. And I'm going to
Mm,
share it with people because you have connected with me, you see me, which is
mm,
one of my taglines is be seen, be heard, be known.
right.
And so I think when we really dive into DISC or any of the personality types, like Enneagram, Strength Finders,
Yep.
all of those,
Mhm.
really understanding people in general and
Mm.
how, like you said, and I like this part of your assessment, is how do you speak to the different types through your typing or your core
Yeah.
values. I think that's so fascinating and how loving to meet
Mm,
people where they're at.
yeah.
And it makes me think of Jesus and how he interacted with so
I
many
almost went there
people
myself.
in a way that spoke to them. I mean, to like the
Yeah.
Pharisees who probably were D's or they were C's
Oh,
in
no, no,
the
the Pharisees are all S's.
S's. Oh,
It's like, "No, no, we have to s keep the status quo,"
oh,
right?
the status quo.
Their
Yeah.
job was
Okay.
to make sure that the kingdom would come, and the only way the kingdom would come is if they actually followed all the rules. So they were, like,
Interesting.
all about making sure, and they created not just the 600 and whatever that were in the Torah, but the 3 to 6,000 that were outside of that, in order to, like, if we keep these out here,
Yeah.
if you're not on video, my arms are outside the screen, then we won't ever break these in here, right? And
Mm,
so even for them to say, "But you're not keeping Torah," means that they're saying, you're keeping the kingdom from coming," and we always love to, like, bash on them and say they couldn't see Messiah, but it
yeah.
was because they were like a whole group of S's that were trying
Yeah.
to, like, keep this, like, "Let's get this done," right?
Yes. Man,
So,
okay, so
yeah.
that's really interesting because you said that I showed up as a high S.
Mhm.
That, like, gives me the heebie-jeebies. So, even, like, in this last week, I went away and I was angered. I love you, small group, if you hear this. But there was such an emphasis on, "Well, I didn't do my quiet time." So, I feel so much shame because I
Mm,
mean, it was like they weren't saying shame, but I went
right.
away from that with my husband, and I was like, "I wish they would just hear Jesus's like, it doesn't have to look one way."
Yeah.
Like, if
Yeah.
I had one message to share, it would be, "Let's blow that out of the water." Like, the
Yeah.
check the box does not matter. So, it is interesting that S came up for me because in a lot of ways, I feel like part of my core message is to stir up the status quo.
That's your I talking. Okay, so for those of you who have not taken a DISC assessment, we'll share, like, I have a freebie that I can share with you. So I'll give you some links that I'll
Okay.
share. And one is what I call a DISC cheat sheet. So I'm going to share a core values exercise with you that's free that you can actually start with. And if that doesn't work, if you need more, I have a digital course and coaching. I'm going to share a DISC freebie with you that is what I call a cheat sheet. It pulls a piece out of the actual Maxwell report that's over 30 pages long. And if you look at the college and career one, it's 42 pages long,
Yes.
but it actually gives you a crosswalk to say, if I see this, then I
Mm,
might be dealing with this. And if I see that, and even with your kids. So I put the kids one in there too. So I'm going to share those
awesome.
freebies with you. But being able to look at those things and say, where am I? You're not one. We're all a bit of all of it. Like I said, it's an
Mm,
XY axis. And so when you look at your report, I wish there's some I mean, not Maxwell report doesn't do this, but some DISC reports actually give it to you in a circle. And it helps you see where you fall on the circle.
mm,
But your second letter is I. So you're an S and an I. And then the other thing Maxwell report does that nobody else does is this thing that we call the power disc, which is these 7 areas of leadership. And your top one is relator. I don't know if you
mm.
looked at that, but it's relating to other people, which tells me that your I is a lot stronger than you might think it is. So you've
Mm.
got your I and your S, and the I is all about making it interesting. That's me. I'd be a pot stirrer myself. Um, so
Yes.
that's how that shows up. And it's a lot of it is just being willing to look at the psychology of how we behave.
Yeah.
And so it's psychology based disc. But then when you take that and you say, but what is a core value for me? Maybe a core value for you is something along the lines of, gosh, I don't know. But if you're upset about people thinking they don't measure up, then it
Mm-hmm.
may have something to do with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially like even Paul said, I became all things to all people. It's like he
Mm-hmm.
learned how to talk to all of them.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mm.
my husband pastored a church in Baltimore called Mars Hill, right? So even on
Oh,
Mars
yeah.
Hill in Athens, he said he talked in their language. He talked to them about their idols. He didn't shy away from them. He didn't get
Mm-hmm.
scared of them. He walked through and he's like, I notice all your idols. And he said, you have this one that's to the unknown God.
Mm.
And he said, let me tell you about that unknown God, and then he quoted their poets to them. He used language that they understood, right?
Mm-hmm.
So being willing and it's the other thing too, Kristen, is always the communicator's responsibility
Yeah.
to make sure the listener understands. It is never the listener's responsibility.
Oh, so good.
Right? So,
Mm.
like I said,
So good.
webinar, masterclass, whatever. And I think we are going to do this for your
Yes.
group. But
Yes.
when we understand it's my responsibility, that changed the way I led my team. That
Mm-hmm.
changes the way I communicate with my son and my husband. Because
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of those people, I don't do really well with little kids. And I like having good banter, but I am not one of those people that appreciates being picked at.
Mm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And evidently, it is my 15-year-old son's love language. My dad did the same thing. And, he would just like pick, 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 pick. He's like, oh, don't bother Andrea. I'm like, just be nice to me. Right. But I'm an
Oh.
I. Right. So it's like all
Yeah.
these things go together. And when you start seeing how they interact and intersect, then understanding ourselves. My dad used to say, why are you doing all this belly button gazing? It's not about, I love the way you said it. It is a loving thing to do. When I understand me, I don't get bent out of shape when they pick at me.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm in a good place. It's not always because I get but I don't do that, right? I don't expect that. My expectations change for people. My ability to set my boundaries becomes much more soft. Like
Mm-hmm.
my house has a yard, but people walk through it because I planted bushes too close to the road. But they don't come up to my door and walk in.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows a closed door means you knock.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we know our core values, we can set our boundaries in ways that people understand, oh, this is their house. I'm sorry. Did I, let me knock, knock, knock,
Mm-hmm.
and then we get the option of letting them in. And I think all of that builds trust with other people. It builds community with other people. It gives them inspiration. It gives you the ability to, when you give the ability to other people to be them. And I love the way you said that. It's like, it is a lot. It's very loving to do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it is you, like you said, the example of Mars Hill of just using the language of them so that they can hear what you're trying to say.
Right.
And I love that you put the responsibility back. It is our responsibility as a podcast host, as a
Hmm.
leader, as a mom, as a wife. I mean,
Hmm.
it is. It's such a beautiful gift to be able to learn the language of those around us. And yeah, this is so helpful. I feel like we could talk for hours and hours. So I will say to everybody listening that if you are enjoying this conversation with Andrea and you want to dive deeper into your disc or into your core values, please check out her links. And I also want to invite you into our monthly podcast membership where she will be having a guest opportunity to come speak at our pod class where we're just going to do a deep dive or deeper dive into the DISC assessment for podcasters. So please be sure to check out that link too. And Andrea, where else can people find you and connect with you?
Sure. I am the intentional optimist. So you can find me at theintentionaloptimist.com. I really respond well on LinkedIn and Instagram, and I'm the intentional optimist there. I will respond to all DMs unless you're like spamming me. And you can even email me at Andrea at theintentionaloptimist.com and I will respond. I get all my own emails.
Mm, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course,
Awesome.
stand tall and own it. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Love it. All right. Well, you guys, this has been such an amazing interview, and I hope that you have been encouraged. I hope you walk away with just a deeper longing to know yourself more and to know what your core values are and how you can become a better podcaster through understanding more of that kingdom identity that God has given each of us. So thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening today. Hey, I want you to know that there is an opportunity for you and I to connect. I would love to do that. Find a link below and we can schedule a one-on-one free 15-minute consultation. I want to hear, where are you in your podcasting journey and how can I help serve you and help you bring that kingdom impact dream into reality?